I never thought I'd be the one standing in my own kitchen, hands shaking, staring at my 58-year-old parents while I forced the words out. You're going to start paying rent, $800 a month, or you're going to have to find somewhere else. My dad's face went red, my mom's eyes filled with tears, and for a second, the only sound was the low hum of the fridge I used to think was too loud. How did I get here? How did the people who raised me turn my house into theirs without a single conversation? And the scariest part? What if I was the monster for finally saying enough? Let me back up, because none of this happened overnight. I'm 32, single, and for the first time in my adult life, I actually had my shit together. I bought this 3-bedroom house 2 years ago after busting my ass at a tech job that lets me work from home. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. Quiet mornings with coffee on the back porch. My home office set up exactly how I liked it, with dual monitors and that fancy ergonomic chair I splurged on. No roommates, no noise, just the kind of peace you dream about when you're younger and crashing on friends' couches. I loved it. I needed it. 3 months ago, my phone rang while I was in the middle of a deadline. It was Mom. Her voice was all bright and bubbly, the way it gets when she's trying to sell you on something. "Sweetheart, your dad and I finally did it. We sold the house." She went on about how they were downsizing, how the market was perfect, how they'd found this cute little apartment complex with a community pool and everything. I was genuinely happy for them. Their house was the same one I grew up in, the one with the creaky third step, and the backyard where I learned to ride a bike. It was time. They were both getting older. Dad's knees weren't what they used to be, and Mom had been complaining about the yard work for years. I told them I was proud, offered to help them move if they needed it. They laughed and said they had everything handled. I believed them. 2 weeks later, I was on the couch scrolling through my phone when the doorbell rang. Not a normal ding-dong, more like someone leaning on it. I opened the door, and there they were, both of them, standing on my porch with matching suitcases and that big U-Haul truck idling at the curb. Dad had on his favorite fishing hat. Mom was clutching her purse like it was a life raft. Behind them, I could see boxes stacked in the truck bed, furniture, lamps, even the old china cabinet from the dining room. My stomach dropped so fast, I felt lightheaded. "Surprise!" Mom sang out, stepping forward to hug me like this was the most normal thing in the world. "The apartment fell through, honey. Just temporary, we promise. We'll be out before you know it." I stood there, frozen, the words "fell through" echoing in my head. No warning, no phone call, no, "Hey, can we crash for a bit?" Just boom, here we are, all our worldly possessions in tow. My mind raced through every possible excuse I could give. But then I looked at Dad's tired eyes and Mom's hopeful smile, and the words died in my throat. They were my parents. They'd fed me, clothed me, cheered at every lame soccer game. Family helps family, right? I swallowed hard, forced a smile, and said, "Okay, a few weeks. We'll figure it out." That night I helped them haul everything inside. The spare bedroom became theirs. Bed, nightstands, the whole 9 yards. They even brought their own TV because the one in the living room is too small. I told myself it was fine. I'd sleep in my bedroom like always, work from the couch if I had to. They were grateful. Or at least they acted like it. Mom made my favorite lasagna that first evening, the one with the extra ricotta, and we sat around the table like old times. Dad cracked jokes about how he'd finally get to watch the game without Mom yelling about the volume. I laughed along, but something in my chest already felt tight, like a rubber band pulled one notch too far. The first week was almost nice, in a weird, nostalgic way. Mom would hum while she made coffee in the morning, the same way she did when I was a kid getting ready for school. Dad would sit on the porch with his crossword and ask me about work. I'd come home from a run and find dinner waiting. Real food, not the microwave stuff I usually survived on. I told myself this was temporary. They'd find a place. They had the money from the house sale sitting in the bank. I knew because Dad mentioned the number once, a nice six-figure number. They just needed time to adjust. But weeks turned into a month, and the temporary started to feel permanent. They stopped talking about apartment hunting. Mom rearranged my kitchen cabinets because it just makes more sense this way, honey. I came down one morning to find my favorite mug, the one with the cracked handle I'd had since college, moved to a shelf I couldn't even reach without a chair. Dad claimed the living room recliner as his throne. All day long the TV blared, sports, news, those loud infomercials that made my head throb. I'd try to work from my bedroom now because the spare room was gone and my home office had become storage for their seasonal clothes and boxes labeled Christmas 2012. I'd sit on my bed with my laptop balanced on a pillow, earbuds in, trying to drown out the sound of Dad yelling at the referees through the wall. My back ached. My focus was shot. At night, I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to them shuffle around downstairs, and feel this slow burn of resentment building in my gut. I started noticing little things that chipped away at me. The grocery bill tripled. They'd eat my food without asking, my fancy Greek yogurt, the steaks I'd splurge on for the week. Mom would say, "We'll replace it, sweetie." But they never did. Utilities skyrocketed too. The electric bill came in one day and I almost choked. $300 because Dad liked the house nice and cool, and Mom ran the dryer for towels every single morning. I'd catch myself clenching my jaw so hard my teeth hurt, then feel guilty for it. These were my parents. They'd sacrificed for me, but every time I walked into my own living room and saw their stuff everywhere, Mom's knitting basket on the coffee table, Dad's slippers by the door like they owned the place, something inside me twisted tighter. By the 2-month mark, I was a ghost in my own home. I'd come out of my room only when I had to, dodging small talk, making excuses to eat at my desk. Friends stopped coming over because the vibe was just off. One buddy texted me, "Dude, your parents still there? Place feels like a nursing home." I laughed it off, but inside I was screaming. I tried dropping hints. "So, any luck on those apartments?" I'd ask over dinner. Mom would sigh dramatically and say, "Nothing feels right yet, honey. We want the perfect spot." Dad would grunt and change the subject to the weather. I felt invisible, like my needs didn't matter anymore. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday. I'd had the worst day at work. Back-to-back meetings, a project deadline breathing down my neck, and I just wanted to collapse on the couch with a beer and silence. Instead, I walked in to find Mom and Dad in the kitchen, arguing over where to hang a new calendar they'd bought. Their calendar, on my wall. The air smelled like the pot roast they'd cooked in my oven using my groceries, and suddenly all the months of swallowed frustration exploded in my chest. My hands started trembling. I could feel my face getting hot. I stood there in the doorway, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears, and I said the words I'd been practicing in my head for weeks. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about rent." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Mom's eyes widened like I'd slapped her. Dad set down his coffee mug slowly, the clink sounding way too loud. I kept going, voice steadier than I felt. "You've been here 3 months. You're using my utilities, eating my food, taking up my space. I love you guys, but this isn't temporary anymore. $800 a month? It's way below what I could charge anyone else. It's fair." Dad's face went from confused to angry in a heartbeat. "You're going to charge your own parents rent?" he said, like the words tasted bitter. Mom's lips started to quiver, and then the tears came. Big, dramatic ones that always used to make me cave when I was a kid. "We raised you," she whispered, voice cracking. "We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us? Family doesn't charge family, sweetheart. We're blood. I felt the guilt slam into me like a truck, but I didn't back down. My voice stayed even though my stomach was in knots. Family also doesn't show up with a truck full of stuff and move in without asking. You had the money from the house sale. You could have found a place. Instead, you just stayed. And now I'm working from my bedroom like a college kid again. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to survive in my own home. Mom covered her face and started sobbing for real. Dad put his arm around her, shooting me a look that made me feel about 2 inches tall. We're hurt, son. Really hurt. We never saw ourselves as a burden. The word burden hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to scream that they weren't the burden, the situation was. But I just stood there, chest tight, wondering if I'd just burned the bridge with the 2 people who were supposed to love me no matter what. That was 2 weeks ago. They haven't paid a dime. The house is still full of their things, their routines, their expectations. My siblings have started blowing up my phone, texts calling me greedy, heartless, saying I should be ashamed. I haven't slept right since. Every night, I replay that kitchen conversation, wondering if I'm the one who's wrong, if blood really does mean free rent forever. But then I walk past my bedroom-turned office and feel that familiar knot in my stomach, and I know I can't keep living like this. The days that followed that kitchen showdown felt like walking through a minefield in my own home. The air was thick with this heavy, unspoken anger that made every creak of the floorboards sound like an accusation. Mom and Dad barely looked at me. Breakfast was silent, except for the clink of spoons against bowls. Mom had taken over making oatmeal every morning, the same way she did when I was 10, but now it tasted like obligation instead of love. I'd sit at the table with my coffee, staring at my phone, pretending to read emails while my stomach churned. Dad would grunt something about the weather and shuffle off to the living room, slamming the recliner back with more force than necessary. The TV volume went up another notch, like he was daring me to complain. I tried to give them space, but there was nowhere left to go. My bedroom had become my everything: office, living room, escape pod. I'd close the door after work calls and just sit on the edge of the bed, rubbing my temples, replaying Mom's tears in my head on loop. "We raised you," she'd whispered that night, and the words stuck like thorns. I remembered her staying up late sewing my Halloween costumes, Dad coaching my Little League team even though he hated baseball. They'd given up vacations so I could have braces, work double shifts when money got tight. Was I really the villain here? My chest would get this hollow ache, like someone had scooped out everything good inside me and left only doubt. But then I'd glance at the stack of boxes still lining the hallway, the ones they swore they'd unpack once we find a place, and the resentment would flare back up, hotter than before. 2 days after I laid down the rent rule, Mom cornered me in the laundry room. I was folding shirts, trying to keep my routine normal, when she appeared in the doorway with that sad, watery-eyed look she'd perfected over the years. "I just don't understand, honey," she said, voice trembling just enough to make my hands pause mid-fold. "We gave you the best years of our lives. Diapers, midnight fevers, college tuition we scraped together, and now you want us to pay like we're strangers?" She reached out and touched my arm, her fingers cold from the basement chill. I felt the guilt crash over me again, thick and suffocating, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I said, quiet but firm, "Mom, I'm not asking for the moon, just to help cover what you're using. The electric bill alone jumped 50%. And the food. You guys go through more in a week than I do in a month." She pulled her hand back like I'd burned her. "Family doesn't keep score," she snapped, then turned and walked away, shoulders shaking. I stood there staring at the dryer, the hum of it vibrating through my bones, wondering how the hell I'd become the bad guy for wanting my life back. Dad was worse in his own way. He didn't cry or guilt trip, he just withdrew. He'd make these little comments when he thought I wasn't listening, loud enough for the walls to carry them straight to my ears. "Guess some kids forget where they came from," he'd mutter while flipping channels. Or he'd leave the newspaper open to the classified section on the kitchen table, circled apartments with prices way above what they could realistically afford on Social Security alone. It was like a passive-aggressive map, pointing out how impossible it all was, without saying a word to my face. I'd catch him on the phone in the backyard sometimes, voice low and bitter, talking to my sister or brother. "Your brother's changed," he'd say. "Thinks his fancy house makes him better than us." My blood would boil, but I'd bite my tongue until it hurt, because what was I supposed to do? Eavesdrop and start another fight? And then the siblings joined the fray. My older sister, Rachel, called me at midnight that first week, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she hissed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazy circles, the glow from my phone screen the only light in the room. "Mom's been crying non-stop. Dad says you're treating them like tenants. They raised all three of us, and this is how you repay them? With a bill?" I tried to explain. The uninvited truck, the 3 months of zero effort, the way my house didn't feel like mine anymore, but she cut me off. "They have money from the sale, sure, but that's for their retirement, not your mortgage. You're being greedy, little brother. Heartless." My brother Jake texted the group chat the next day. A screenshot of some viral post about honoring your parents, with a caption that just said, "This you?" The family thread blew up after that. Accusations flying, old grudges resurfacing like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. I muted the chat, but the damage was done. I felt isolated, like the black sheep in my own story, the one everyone whispered about at holidays. Nights were the worst. I'd lie there after everyone went to bed, the house finally quiet except for the occasional creak from their room down the hall. I'd scroll through rental listings on my laptop, heart racing with this frantic hope that maybe they'd actually look if I sent them options. One night, I found a perfect one-bedroom not 10 minutes away, ground floor unit, pet-friendly even though they didn't have pets. I printed it out, left it on the counter with a note. "This looks nice. What do you think?" The next morning, it was in the trash, crumpled like it had never existed. Mom saw me notice and just shrugged. "Nothing feels right yet," she said again. Same line as always. But this time, her eyes dared me to push it. I felt my jaw lock so tight, I thought I'd crack a tooth. Part of me wanted to scream, to drag their suitcases to the curb and change the locks right then. But the other part, the kid who still craved their approval, kept whispering that blood was thicker than square footage, that kicking them out would make me the monster my family already thought I was. Work started suffering too. I'd zone out during meetings, staring at the little camera light on my laptop while my boss droned on about deadlines, my mind replaying Dad's face when I said the word rent. My performance reviews dipped for the first time in years. Friends texted less. One even joked that my place had become a parent hotel, and maybe I should start charging extra for the guilt trip. I laughed it off in the group chat, but inside, I was unraveling. Every time I smelled Mom's coffee brewing or heard Dad's laugh track from the living room, it felt like another brick in the wall closing me in. My house, the one I'd painted, furnished, made mine, was shrinking around me, turning into this pressure cooker of resentment and love and fear all mixed together. I kept waiting for them to crack, to finally say, "You're right, we'll pay," and start packing. But 2 weeks in, nothing. The money from the house sale sat untouched in their account. I knew because Mom had accidentally left a bank statement on the counter one day, the balance bold and tempting. They could have covered rent for years and still had plenty left. Instead, they dug in deeper, rearranging more of my stuff like they were nesting for good. I stood in the kitchen one evening, watching the sunset paint the walls orange through the window they'd insisted on keeping the blinds open for, and felt this wave of exhaustion so deep it made my knees weak. Was I really doing the right thing? Or had I just traded my peace for a fight I couldn't win? The next morning hit like a freight train. I woke up to the sound of drawers slamming downstairs, loud, deliberate, the kind of noise that screams, "We're making a point." My heart jumped into my throat before my eyes even opened. I lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling cracks I'd memorized over the last 3 months, and felt that familiar mix of dread and defiance twisting in my stomach. Part of me wanted to pull the covers over my head and pretend none of this was happening. The other part, the exhausted, cornered part, knew I had to face it. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on a hoodie, and padded downstairs in my socks, the wooden floors cold under my feet like a warning. Mom was in the kitchen, yanking open cabinets and tossing things into a cardboard box with way more force than necessary. Cans of soup, boxes of pasta, even the half-empty jar of my favorite peanut butter. Dad sat at the table, arms crossed, staring at the wall like he was daring it to argue back. The air smelled like burnt toast and tension, thick enough to choke on. "What's going on?" I asked, voice rough from sleep and everything unsaid. Mom didn't even turn around at first. When she did, her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was steel in them too. "We're not staying where we're not wanted, honey," she said, the word honey dripping with sarcasm. "We'll get a hotel tonight. Figure it out from there. Wouldn't want to be a burden on our own son." She slammed the box shut, tape gun screeching as she sealed it. Dad just nodded once, slow and heavy, like he was signing off on a funeral. My chest tightened so hard I thought my ribs might crack. This was it, the guilt bomb I'd been waiting for. They were weaponizing their exit, making sure I felt every ounce of it. I could see the suitcases by the front door already half packed, their clothes spilling out like accusations. I stood there, barefoot in my own kitchen, and for a split second I almost caved. The words, "Forget the rent, just stay," were right on the tip of my tongue, burning like acid. But then I remembered the last 90 days. My office buried under their winter coats, the electric bill that made my eyes water, the way I'd started locking my bedroom door just to have 5 minutes of privacy. "Mom, Dad, that's not what I'm saying," I managed, my voice cracking despite myself. "I'm not kicking you out. I'm asking you to contribute. $800. That's less than a cheap apartment would cost you anyway. You have the money from the house." Dad cut me off with a laugh that wasn't funny at all. "The house we sold so we could retire in peace? That money? You want us to hand it over to you like some kind of landlord?" He stood up, chair scraping loud against the tile, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look at me like I was a stranger. "We wiped your nose, taught you how to drive, sat through every one of your basketball games, even when you sucked. And now you're nickel and diming us? Family doesn't do that, son." The room spun a little. I felt the heat rising in my face, this hot, prickly shame mixed with anger that made my hands ball into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream that family also doesn't ambush you with a moving truck and turn your sanctuary into a retirement home without asking. But instead, I just stood there, swallowing it all down, the lump in my throat growing bigger by the second. Mom started crying again, quiet this time, the kind that comes from deep down, and it hit me harder than the loud sobs from before. She looked so small suddenly, standing there in my kitchen that used to feel like home, clutching that box like it was all she had left. I spent the rest of the day in my room, door shut, laptop open to nothing but a blank screen. My mind raced through every memory I could grab, like flipping through an old photo album that hurt to touch. There was the time Dad worked overtime for 6 months so I could go on that senior trip to Washington, D.C. Mom baking cookies for my entire baseball team after we lost the championship, telling me it was okay to lose sometimes. They'd been there through my first breakup, my college dropout scare, the time I totaled my first car and thought my life was over. How could I look them in the eye and say their presence here was costing me my sanity? But then I'd glance at the clock and realize it was already noon, and I hadn't eaten because the kitchen felt like enemy territory now. My phone buzzed nonstop. Rachel texting paragraphs about how I was destroying the family. Jake sending memes about ungrateful kids. Even my aunt got involved, leaving a voicemail that made my stomach drop. I never thought you'd be the type to turn your back on blood, sweetie. By evening, the house was quieter than it had been in months. Too quiet. Mom and Dad had taken their boxes to the guest room and closed the door. I could hear the low murmur of their voices through the wall, but I couldn't make out the words. I sat on my bed, knees drawn up, and felt this crushing loneliness settle over me like a blanket soaked in ice water. I'd always pictured myself as the good son, the one who showed up for holidays, called on Sundays, helped with tech stuff when their computer broke. Now I was the villain in their story. The greedy 32-year-old who valued square footage over family. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I just sat there, replaying that sunset in the kitchen, wondering if standing my ground was going to cost me everything that mattered. The next few days blurred into this weird limbo. They didn't leave for the hotel after all, something about not wanting to waste money on our own kids' stubbornness. But the silent treatment ramped up. Mom cooked meals, but only set the table for two. Dad watched TV with the volume low now, like he was trying to erase his presence while still taking up space. I'd come downstairs for water at midnight and find them both in the living room, heads bent together over their phones, probably scrolling through apartments they had no intention of calling. The resentment I felt started mixing with this deep, aching sadness that kept me up at night. I missed them, the real them. Not this version that had turned my home into a battlefield. I missed the easy laughs, the way Mom would ruffle my hair when she walked by, Dad's terrible dad jokes that somehow always landed. I even tried one last olive branch. I printed out 3 solid apartment listings, ones with reasonable rent, close to their doctors, everything they'd said they wanted, and slid them under their door with a note that just said, "I love you guys. Let's figure this out together." No response. Not a word. Instead, the next morning, I found the papers shredded in the trash, mixed in with coffee grounds like they were trying to bury the evidence. That shredded paper felt like my heart looked, ripped apart and discarded. I stood over the bin, hands gripping the counter until my knuckles went white. And for the first time, I let myself think the unthinkable. Maybe I needed to talk to a lawyer. Just to know my options. The thought made me sick, but so did the idea of living like this for another 3 months. Work was a nightmare. I fumbled through presentations, my voice flat, my mind a million miles away. My boss pulled me aside after one meeting, asking if everything was okay at home. I lied and said it was fine, but inside I was screaming. Friends were pulling away too. One even suggested I just let them stay, man. It's not forever. But it already felt like forever. Every creak in the house, every whiff of Mom's perfume in the hallway reminded me that my life had been hijacked. I was drowning in my own home, and the people who were supposed to be my anchor were the ones holding me under. A full week passed with 0 rent paid. The silence had become its own kind of scream. I caught Mom staring at me once across the living room, her eyes full of this hurt that mirrored my own. And for a heartbeat, I saw the woman who used to tuck me in at night. But then she looked away, and the wall went back up. I knew something had to give soon. Either they'd break, or I would. And the scary part was, I wasn't sure which one I was rooting for anymore. The tension finally snapped on a rainy Thursday evening. The kind where the sky hung low and gray, and the drops against the windows sounded like 1,000 tiny accusations. I'd just finished a brutal day of back-to-back Zoom calls, my neck stiff from hunching over my laptop in bed, when I heard the front door open without a knock. Voices, loud ones. Rachel and Jake. My stomach dropped like a stone. I hadn't invited them. No one had warned me. But here they were, stomping the rain off their shoes in my entryway like they owned the place too, carrying takeout bags that smelled like Chinese food and judgment. Mom and Dad emerged from the guest room almost instantly, like they'd been waiting for reinforcements. The four of them clustered in the living room, voices overlapping in that chaotic family symphony I used to love, but now made my skin crawl. Rachel spotted me first, her eyes narrowing as I came down the stairs. "There he is," she said, not even trying to hide the edge in her voice. "The guy who's evicting his own parents." Jake just shook his head, arms crossed, looking everywhere but at me. Dad sank into his recliner, my recliner, and Mom perched on the arm like she needed the support. The room felt smaller than ever, the air thick with the scent of soy sauce and wet coats and decades of unresolved stuff. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, heart hammering so hard it felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. My hands were clammy, my mouth dry. But I didn't run back upstairs. Not this time. "What's this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though everything inside me was screaming. Rachel set the takeout down with a thud. "We're here because you won't listen to reason. Mom and Dad told us everything. You're really making them pay rent? After everything they've done for you?" Her words landed like punches, each one landing exactly where it hurt most. I felt the old childhood guilt flood back. The nights I'd snuck out, the college loans they'd co-signed, the hospital vigil when I had my appendix out and Dad slept in that plastic chair for 3 straight days. But I didn't flinch. I walked into the room, the carpet soft under my bare feet, and looked each of them in the eye. Everything they've done? Yeah, I remember. I remember the truck showing up with 0 warning. I remember 3 months of my office disappearing, my kitchen getting rearranged, my bills tripling while they look for a place that somehow never materializes. My voice rose, raw and unsteady, but it felt good to finally let it out. I love you guys. I do. But love doesn't mean I hand over my life like it's some kind of inheritance. You sold your house for a reason. You have the money. Why am I the only one expected to sacrifice everything? Mom started crying again, quieter this time, the kind that made her shoulders shake and her mascara run in little black rivers. "We never meant to be in the way," she whispered, but Dad cut in, his face flushed. "Your mother raised you better than this. Family doesn't charge family. We wiped your butt, son. We taught you right from wrong. And now you're treating us like boarders?" Jake jumped in, pointing a finger at me like I was on trial. "You've got this big house, good job, no kids. What's $800 to you? You're being selfish, heartless." Rachel nodded along, her voice softer but no less cutting. "We all pitched in for you growing up. Now it's your turn." The words hung there, heavy as the rain outside. I felt my knees go weak for a second, the weight of it all pressing down until I thought I might buckle. My mind flashed through every late-night worry I'd had since they moved in. The way my chest tightened every time I heard their footsteps. The quiet dread of coming home to a house that wasn't mine anymore. The texts from friends asking if I was okay because I sounded off. I thought about the shredded apartment listings in the trash, the bank statement I'd seen with all that money sitting there untouched. The way I'd started questioning if I even deserved my own peace. The bile rose in my throat, hot and bitter, but underneath it was something else, a quiet, burning certainty that had been growing for months. I took a deep breath, the air tasting like takeout and regret, and I said the words that had been building inside me like a storm. "You're right about one thing. You did everything for me, and I'm grateful, more than you know. But gratitude doesn't mean I let you move in uninvited and stay forever. I asked for rent because I need my home back. $800 is nothing compared to what you're using. If family doesn't charge family, then family also doesn't take without asking. I'm not kicking you out tonight, but the rent starts now, or you find somewhere else. That's it. No more guilt trips, no more silent treatment. This is my house." The room went dead quiet, except for the rain tapping against the glass. Mom's tears slowed. Dad stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Really seeing the man I'd become, not the kid they remembered. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. Jake looked down at his shoes. I stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the explosion. But it didn't come. Not the way I expected. Instead, Dad let out this long, tired sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the last 3 months. We didn't think it was this bad for you, he muttered, almost to himself. Mom wiped her eyes and nodded once, small and shaky. No one apologized outright. No one packed bags that night. But something shifted in the air, like the pressure finally broke. The next morning, a check for $800 was sitting on the kitchen counter, paper clipped to a note in Mom's handwriting. We're still looking. We love you. It wasn't perfect. The tension didn't vanish overnight. Dad still watched his games a little too loud sometimes, and Mom still moved things in the cabinets out of habit. But they started making calls. They toured 2 apartments the following weekend. My siblings backed off after I sent a long group text laying it all out. No anger, just the truth. Slowly, the house started feeling like mine again. I unpacked my office bit by bit. I ate dinner at the table without bracing for conflict. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night without that knot in my gut. I'm still trying to process all of this. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more of my journey, make sure to subscribe.